Waterloo Institute for Health Informatics Research. And I welcome you today to hear the seminar on the Data Liberation Initiative and the Research Data Center at the University of Waterloo. It's my delight that we have three speakers that will be giving this seminar today. Keith Warriner is an associate professor of sociology at the University of Waterloo and founding co-director of the Southwestern Ontario Research Data Center. Sandra Keys is the liaison librarian for accountancy and business and entrepreneurship and the Data Liberation Initiative representative at the University of Waterloo. And Pat Newcombe-Welche is the Statistics Canada Research Data Analyst attached to the Data Center. So without any further ado, I welcome our speakers and let you go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Thanks for having us here. I'm excited to talk about the DLI and why is my mouse working? There we go. DLI and the RDC. Nice to see people. I know most of the people in the room, so everyone most knows me. The way it'll work here is I'm just going to introduce Sandra at this time. Before I do that, I'll just show you the outline of today's talk. So we'll talk about the DLI first, and Sandra will do that. And then at the juncture between the RDC and the DLI are the various kinds of microdata files that are available here at the university. And so she will talk about those, the pump files, the synthetic files. And then I'll take over and talk about the master files, which lead us to the Research Data Center program. And then when we've gone through that, then we'll talk about the access to the DLI planning projects and that. This is very much oriented towards encouraging people to become researchers in these programs. These are really wonderful programs, particularly with respect to graduate students. I'll show you some examples of research, which is health-related research, is currently going on in the Research Data Center, but it's these programs have made available very, very high-quality data to graduate students at no cost, and so has really streamlined in many cases their progress through their programs and things like that. But we have many faculty researchers too, from not only UW but from around southwestern Ontario that come to our center. So I'll turn it over to Sandra, and she can talk about the DLI for a while, and then.
Great, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here today to talk about the Data Liberation Initiative, which is having its 10-year birthday this year. Happy birthday, DLI. And I understand there's going to be lots of celebrations across Canada, so I'm eagerly awaiting those. And I wasn't here 10 years ago when it started, but I understand it got started because researchers in academic institutions needed research, needed the data files, and they were very expensive to get. So the academic institutions got together and started lobbying, and DLI was the baby of that. And so it provides Canadian academic institutions access to Statistics Canada data files and databases for teaching and research. And as I said, it's 10 years old this year. And the institutions do pay an annual fee to belong to that. Local access to the DLI files. All the institutions that are members have a local DLI rep. I'm the rep for the University of Waterloo. And it's usually associated with a data service or center, and that is different across the different campuses, how they set theirs up. I act as a liaison between the DLI and the local data service. We here at Waterloo have a group of us who act as the local data service, and we have different things in the library. We're mostly doing access. We also have some people at IST who can help out with statistical and consulting help. Some of the other things that we do, we have access to the metadata, the code books, and such. Most of the new ones, and even a large majority of the older ones, are now available online for you, so you don't need to come and visit us in the library to get those, but we do maintain some of them in hard copy where they're not available electronically. We will assist you with finding the data sets and the variables that will help you with your research. And often there are SPSS, SAS system files, that are done from the raw data files, and they're distributed through the DLI. Sometimes they come straight from Stats Canada. Sometimes we have some really knowledgeable people who can do them out in the universities, and then they make them available to the rest of us. We'll help you with statistical package use, and we will provide you with information about the use of the remote job submission and the RDCs if you come to us first of all, and we can't help you through the DLI. Okay, there we go, sorry. Microdata files. Well, there's hundreds of data sets that are available. Some examples here, the census, and then a whole bunch of acronymed surveys. General Social Survey, a Social of Consumer, fine, thank you. The National Longitudinal Survey of Children and Youth, voila, et cetera, et cetera. I won't try going through the rest of them. We get information on age, gender, income, internet use, marital status, education, ethnic origin, home ownership, VCRs, attitudes, health. It goes on and on and on. I'm constantly amazed at how much information is available. NestStar is the new interface that we're using here at Waterloo, as well as the other two TDR universities, University of Guelph and Wilfrid Laurier University, and it allows us to get access to these data files and do subsetting, searching, browsing, subsetting, downloading the data for analysis, as well as accessing the documentation. That's the page that you'll see when you come into it, and on this copy, the little red thing isn't quite in the right spot. But the little red box is supposed to be highlighting the username and password. So you can look at that when you get in. You only need that if you're actually downloading the data. If you just want to look and see what's there, which is usually what I'm just doing, you don't actually need that information, but it is there. And if anybody's interested and hasn't seen this before, we can certainly get in touch with me, and I'll be happy to go over that with people. Types of microdata files. First of all, there's the public access microdata products that are available through the DLI. Those are the public use anonymized microdata, public use microdata files, or the PUMFs. And the synthetic files, which they used to call dummy files when I started a few years ago, and I had no idea what they were talking about. So I like the word synthetic a little bit better than dummy files. And then there's also those confidential microdata products that are available in the RDC, and those are the master files. For the PUMF microdata, it's basically raw data, which is organized in a file where the records or lines in the file are observations of a specific unit of analysis, and the information on the lines are the values of the variables. It does require some form of processing or analysis to be used. And the big thing behind this is that you aren't able to identify individuals. As you probably know, Statistics Canada is very concerned with confidentiality. And when you fill in your census, you're basically, nobody's going to be able to grab that census form, pretty much, and be able to say what you do and how many bathrooms you have in your house if you filled in the long form. The synthetic files look like master files. There's lots of observations for the most part, lots of variables, little grouping or capping of categories, lots of geographic detail. The PUMF files will often have suppressed variables and observations, again, to maintain that confidentiality. So your synthetic files have more fullness of data available. But you've got to remember, these are not real observations. Somebody's somehow messed with the data and confused it. And I'm not really sure how that happens, but my little brain says that means I really live in Winnipeg, but and not Waterloo. But maybe somebody else can explain those a little bit better. For the synthetic files, it's the author divisions that do create it when they are created. And they're most relevant when dealing with new panel data, the longitudinal surveys, such as the National Longitudinal Survey of Children and Youth, National Population Health Survey, and the Canadian Community Health Surveys as examples. Sure, yes.
In case anybody's confused, the purpose of having synthetic files is allow researchers to write and test their code. And then they're meant for the remote data access program. So people can access the synthetic files and write their syntax. So it's for that purpose identical to the master file, except it is dummy data.
And then moving over to confidential. Yeah, we're here already, Keith.
Talk fast. Okay, so we'll move on to the master files, which take us into the RDC program. So the master files are the original files, the original surveys that have been collected by Stats Canada. So they collect data, obviously, at the level of the individual, and they collect it from thousands of cases. Some of these, most of these files are large sample surveys of anywhere from 17 to 25 to 26,000. The CCHS, the Canadian Community Health Survey, has 131,000 cases in its first wave. So these are large data sets which have individual level data, which is not available through the pump files. So these are protected under the Statistics Act, and therefore, in order to get to microdata, you need to be in an RDC. They look something like this. The idea behind the confidential microdata particularly suppresses information of two sorts in particular, or three sorts perhaps. One generally has to do with geographical locale. So if geography is a matter of interest to you, you certainly would get some broad sense of geography, but not something that would provide you with information on gander, for example, because it would be very straightforward, probably with further controls introduced into the analysis to break that down to the medical doctor, three medical doctors in gander, and no time at all. Therefore, their confidentiality would be breached. So therefore, the microdata do contain information, very fine information on geography, but the pump files won't provide you with that kind of information. So the other kind of thing that I'm not quite sure why I've got this particular slide in here, because actually, well, it does have some fairly small cells, but they're not that small. Buddhist are 91, and this one is a better example of country of origin with 5 identified from Hungary, for example. So these indicate variables in the microdata that would allow people to be identified, particularly once you began to delve into the data in any way. The microdata are converted with respect to the pump files in a couple of ways. First of all, there are, in terms of geographical locale, they tend to be broad aggregates, so that you can get major CMAs and things like that, but you're not going to get down to the level of neighborhood or street or anything like that. And sometimes you definitely want that. I have an interest in the neighborhood health, and I definitely want to get neighborhood level data. The other type of, a lot of information too is suppressed. This can be very, very irritating with respect to the pump files, depending on who was responsible at Stats Canada for deciding on what variables could be suppressed, I should say. I don't know, Pat might have a view on this. It sometimes seems to me that it's very, very arbitrary in terms of how variables are determined not to be included in the pump files. I know, for example, the National Graduate Survey, one of my students was trying to use the pump file a couple of years ago, and I had downloaded it off the TDR for her, and thought for days thought I'd made a mistake because record after record was empty, and I thought something had gone wrong. But the fact was that about the first 400 variables, and therefore, many pages on my data editor were empty, and finally discovered that if I went far into the the end of the data set, I could discover a few variables. So someone at Stats Canada decided that virtually everything about graduate education needed to be suppressed in order to protect the privacy of Canadian graduate students.
Yeah,
I
get
a correction here.
No, it's not a correction. I haven't run across that, but I'm just surprised that it was presented in that format, because usually the variables that are suppressed just aren't there. They're not represented by blank spaces. So I don't think that's typical. But it's not arbitrary, but every survey has its own manager, and it's up to the survey, so the rules are different from survey to survey. So you certainly could be forgiven for getting confused.
And the National Graduate Survey is not a highly, I would say it's not as highly supported by Stats Canada to the extent that there are various levels of support, basically, based upon the available personnel and the resources that exist in Ottawa to do this. So each of the author groups has various resources available to them, and they have to make decisions about how they're going to do it.
The code book for the National Longitudinal Survey of Children and Youth. So it is publicly available. See, there's some numbers there that indicate that variable wouldn't be available in the pump. The National Population Health Survey will not make the code book version of such variables available. So there are differences between the surveys about what is and isn't publicly available. So this is the kids survey, so this is publicly available. For the CCHS or the NPHS, the code book information of these frequencies that are low wouldn't be published publicly.
So we have suppression of geographic information is very, very common. We have suppression of any range of variables that may allow people to be identified with controls. These can be considerable in some of the pump files. We have a third type of variable, which is a cap variable. An example that Pat was explaining to me as we walked over was income is of pretty much strong interest by many, many researchers. We have in terms of the microdata, we would have very fine information on income categories. But those income categories will be capped at something, I would guess, you were saying something like 500,000, but my guess it's probably something like 120,000 or 140,000. So if you were interested in people that were making very affluent people making considerable incomes of 140,000 to 800,000 or something like that, you wouldn't get that information. They would just be capped at 100. As far as the pump file is concerned, it would be $140,000. So those are the types of controls that Statistics Canada has incorporated in order to protect the privacy of Canadians with the pump files. And on the positive side, with the introduction of those controls, it means that there are absolutely wonderful data available very, very easily through the libraries in order for people, students and faculty to do research. And on the downside, it means that many of the questions that they might have may not be available to them because of the suppression or the loss of data. So pump we get through the DLI, through Sandra and people that she works with. Available very locally, very available online through Nestar. Very simple to download those files. I encourage my students, graduate students, to do it, and I never have complaints that they have any difficulty gaining these high-quality data. Can be analyzed through a variety of software packages available depending on the particular setting in which you're analyzing. So various labs have, everyone has SAS and SPSS. Well, everyone has SPSS. Almost every place you go on campus should have SAS. And then some of these other statistical programs like STATA, hierarchical linear modeling, LISROL, it comes in a version called AMOS with SPSS. So some of them are available, and others would only be available in a local lab. The RDC has virtually every type of sophisticated statistical software that you could dream of. A large certain amount of it never gets used just because we have so much of it. The synthetic files are created by Stats Canada. They're what they call the author division. That is the group in Ottawa that is basically responsible for that particular survey, and is their mission to create it, to administer it, to handle the access to the data and things like that. They're also available locally through consultation with the TDR staff, and normally people write the syntax and test it using SAS or SPSS, and if it works, then hopefully they will get permission to do the real thing in the RDCs. And the master files are restricted only to those people that are provided with access to research data centers. Here at the University of Waterloo, we have the Southwestern Ontario Research Data Center, which we call SWORDC, not SWORDC, we like SWORDC. It rolls off the tongue a little better. These data are restricted under the Statistics Act, and I'll explain how that works as we go. So here's our logo again, and you can see the finer detail. Now, you really have got me bothered there, Dominic. I'm definitely going to look into what the source of this strange animal is, because I have no clue what it means. And I've always just taken it for granted. Okay, so these are the new longitudinal, for the most part, these are the new longitudinal surveys, which for the most part, in terms of the longitudinal nature, it's not possible to produce micro data sets. So longitudinal data, of course, are data in which panels of respondents are resurveyed, usually every couple of years, and over time. And therefore, the benefit of these particular records is that they can be linked. So in terms of health outcomes, instead of trying to infer on the basis of cross-sectional data whether smoking leads to early death, and that we can track someone who's a smoker and how long they live. We can track the same people that quit smoking and what their health status is and whether it improves and so on and so forth. And so it's real change. It's real time. It's real change. It's real causal association. It's not the kind of causal association which we're limited to in terms of cross-sectional kinds of surveys, which only take a snapshot at one point of time. We have a number of these new longitudinal data. There's some of them, they're not that new anymore because a number have been around since the late, the 1990s. But they keep producing more of these. Stats Canada, and I'm sure Pat will agree with me, has been referred to as the best government statistical agency in the world. And they do some very, very, very fine work in terms of social surveys. And the latest mandate for them, beyond what is their principal quest, which is the Canadian census, is to create these longitudinal surveys, and they've created a number of them, and now we're well into them, and they are very, very, very expensive. Millions of dollars are spent on these surveys individually. It's necessary for Stats Canada to justify them, not only through the type of policy-related research that they themselves generate as analysts, but also to make them available to academic researchers so that we can undertake both basic and policy research in relation to them. And it's very, very important that these data somehow be put in the hands of people in the academic community. So the Research Data Center program was initiated in conjunction with the Canadian Initiative on Social Statistics. That's not social sciences. Canadian Initiative on Social Statistics of a few years ago, which was a panel of government and academic experts that looked into ways in which the devolution of data could take place. And in particular, it was discovered that Canada was lagging behind other advanced Western nations in terms of our training of highly specialized data analysts in our universities as graduate students, and it appeared to the Canadian Initiative on Social Statistics that we needed to up our standards and level of training with respect to graduate student education to create the next generation of highly trained data analyst specialists. And so that's part of the mandate for the Research Data Center, and we think we're being successful in that because certainly graduate students are regular users of the RDCs. The context here in terms of the Research Data Center, the way it works is it's a secure Statistics Canada environment in a university setting. It houses the micro data sets, in particular the longitudinal. They were created for the sake of housing the longitudinal data sets, but we do house more data than just the longitudinal data. But the idea was that the longitudinal data could not be turned into a pump file in order to allow the tracking of individual records. So therefore, the research data centers were conceived as principally there in order to accommodate and house these data. Staffed by a real Statistics Canada, quite a senior Statistics Canada employee, a person, Pat has a PhD in, I always want to, well, statistics, yeah, just statistics. I always think epidemiology, but I'm just wrong about that, right? Yeah, okay, just wrong about that. I get that in my mind.
UW Statistics.
UW Statistics. So Pat has her PhD in statistics from here here at UW, was working for Stats Canada, and we were fortunate to have her seconded to basically through Stats Canada to become the Stats Canada employee at the RDC. So she's very familiar with both the university and Stats Canada. So we're blessed by that. It operates under the provision of the Statistics Act, and one of the features of that is that when someone is given approval and allowed to work in the RDC, they take an oath of office of sort, or take a confidentiality oath. They are sworn, and they are deemed an employee of Stats Canada. So that is since under the Statistics Act, only Statistics Canada employees have access to the micro-level data. In order to achieve that, when someone becomes an RDC user and has a proposal approved, then they are deemed an employee, unpaid, of course, of Statistics Canada, and may take pride in that, I think, because it is a great agency to be associated with. In terms of the various RDCs in Canada, we were the original. There were original 9 groups of RDCs, 6 of which received CFI funding, and we were one of those. Of the group that you see here, the 2 that did not receive CFI funding at the time of their startup around 2001 or so, 2001, were McMaster and UNB. The rest of us received an infrastructure grant in order to build the research labs, and since then, the RDCs have become something which most research-intensive universities feel that they need to have, and some of those universities that kind of missed the initial call for the opening of RDCs regretted it later on, and since more recently we've had new RDCs open up at Western Ontario, Queens, Carleton, and Manitoba, and it's become more or less standard now that the research-intensive universities feel that they need to have an RDC in order to be on par with those that they compare themselves to. Western Ontario used to be our partner in SWORDC and did send us a number of clients, but regretted hugely the fact that they didn't have an RDC after a couple of years. And as you know, there's always been this kind of competitiveness that exists between UWO and Waterloo. I don't know if you guys experience that in your programs, but this has always been a big thing in sociology. That sociology and UW Western always comparing each other. And so we were quite put out, of course, when they opened their own RDC and took away our business. And we felt that we were somewhat the big brother to them in this instance, but no longer. But we're striving to outpace them. In addition to the RDCs, a number of RDCs have now opened satellite or branch offices of their centers. These particularly exist in Quebec, where University of Montreal took the initiative of opening RDCs, but with the understanding that it would share the privilege with the other Quebec universities. In Ontario, which might be a statement on, Quebec Anglo-Canada differences. Of course, all the universities decided individual universities decided they would go on their own. And we actually got in a fierce struggle with McMaster over the establishment of the RDC in southwestern Ontario, and essentially came out the winners in that struggle. And they picked up or went away and started their own RDC anyhow without CFI funding. But anyhow, that's more or less indicative of how Anglo-Canadian universities work versus the cooperative communitarian style that exists in the Quebec system, where they all work together and have produced these satellite RDCs. SWORDC has a satellite RDC that we're about to open very shortly at Laurentian, and we also have an information office down at Brock University. So we also have expanded beyond UW. Oh, okay, now I've got all this stuff going here. Okay, so the operations of RDCs is that they provide a secure computing environment with the on-site analyst. The on-site analyst has links to specialists in Ottawa, which is and frequently provides information and resources from people in the author divisions or elsewhere at Stats Canada. That's a wonderful resource too, providing analytical support and data support. We also try to branch out and have links with resources within the host institution, as we're doing today, and with our connection with the Health Informatics Institute here, as well as CBURPE and other groups here at the university. And we're always interested in being helpful and providing a resource to new research programs and initiatives. Here are the data holdings the longitudinal data holdings that exist in the RDC at the time. So there are a number of them. The ones which are highlighted in pink are the particularly health relevant ones. The National Longitudinal Survey of Children and Youth is being used to study children's health and issues in our lab on a number of occasions. I'll show you some examples of that in a second. National Population Health Survey, Canadian Community Health Survey, the Health Surveys Access Survey, which is now being folded into the Canadian Community Health Survey. It's a survey that's rather limited in terms of wait times for certain procedures and generally wait times also with regard to family practice consultations and that. But hopefully the data are better than what was reported in the Globe and Mail today with respect to wait time. Apparently the quality of data over accessibility to lots of procedures is so sorely wanting, according to the information that was reported today. So, and a number of other very interesting surveys, some of which certainly could be incorporated in terms of broadly defined health issues. The general social surveys are a series of surveys that I think we're about cycle 14 now, and they often have a particular theme, and we have had some health themes and
I can't think of it right at the moment.
But I'm pretty sure.
What comes to mind is 13 is victimization.
Yeah. They
Yeah,
all,
there are some health themes.
yeah, I mean, it just, there has to be because, you know, health is Canadian obsession, it must be. So it clearly would be, have to be. And a number of other surveys. These are all longitudinal, well, except for the general social surveys are not longitudinal.
The
And the CCHS isn't, isn't really a longitudinal survey. But these are all data sets which are, the general social surveys are very prevalent and easily accessible through PUMP, but these, of course, would provide you with the microdata on those. So those are very, very popular surveys in terms of researchers. And some of the other surveys are quite a bit more challenging in order to work with because of the complexity of the data. And these are very, very complex sampling strategies, disproportionate stratified national samples, which have involved with them very, very complex sampling errors, which have to be adjusted generally through special techniques we call bootstrapping and others, which take into account those sampling errors, and therefore analyzing them usually requires some expert input from PAT. But we do provide that information. And in addition, just about any other kind of data that you have an interest in that would, you could indicate the need for it at the micro level, we will undertake to get it and have a fair chance of getting it. Now, some of these, I spoke of the National Graduate Survey, which one of our, of a PhD dissertation in our department was undertaken on it. So it's in the RDC, where it wouldn't be in most other RDCs perhaps, and that. But some of these other holdings, other surveys and things like that are not supported to the same level by Stats Canada, that they would be in a position that they would be able to provide the microdata because they haven't produced all the documentation and other kinds of resources that you need as an individual user. They're basically just doing it in-house. So, but we will always ask for those data, census data, any kind of data that you've heard about, and there are. Well, okay. We'll always ask.
There's certain surveys. Any of the business surveys are totally off limits. So we always ask researchers if they're interested in a survey that's not a core survey to get in touch with me first, and I'll check with head office, and then they'll say, well, it is a candidate. Then go ahead and go through the process.
Oh, yeah, so we will always, it's always a good idea to ask Pat, and we will look into it, and we've been quite successful in obtaining a number of these surveys when it's been indicated.
But you don't want to go through all the work of writing a proposal and submitting it if it's a definite no-go from StatsCan's point of view.
Right. If something is not available through RDC, then they can still link to Statistics Canada. If there is a survey that is not available through RDC.
If it's a survey that a researcher is interested in using, they should check with me, and I can, or the local analyst, wherever they are, and we can check with head office to see if it's a candidate for the RDC. There are surveys that aren't core surveys, but they will be placed in an RDC if somebody writes a successful proposal. But there are other surveys, which the business surveys, for example, which won't be placed in the research data center.
Right, but is there a way for them to get the business information, or that's it?
No, not really. This actually, this point that Pat just made about the business data drove Paul Guild, our former president of vice president of research, crazy, because he was interested in the research data program, but he was very, very vexed by the notion that the Stats Canada wouldn't permit business data, because he saw all sorts of useful ways in which the researchers would like to have corporate type data and that. But this is something that the business community has basically lobbied to prevent. So there's a survey called WES, which is the Workplace and Employee Service survey. And it contains both data on employees, and it also contains data on corporations. Now, some of these corporations are very large corporations like GM and IBM and things like that. And now I'm not an insider, but as I understand it, the lobbying from some of the very large corporations resulted in the business data associated with the West, the corporate data associated with West, not being brought into. I don't think it's being brought in now.
We
Initially
have
wasn't.
it now.
Yeah,
Yeah, so we never say never, because they did say never, and we have it now.
Yeah.
There are some suppressions, but that's the only business survey.
So that was the story for initially. It wasn't allowed in on the grounds that this would be too easy to identify who's IBM or who's General Motors or something. But as we say, we just keep sort of everyone gets angry over it, because the fact is this is the RDC is supposed to be housing these days. They're created from it, so there's a big backlash from the RDC community over this, and eventually it resulted in us getting most of it. Yes. Oh, look, you can't.
Can we hold questions till the end?
We need to get it online.
Okay, we'll come back to it. Okay, so here are some recent health-related projects. In pink, the surveys that were used. You can see the NLSCY, NPHS, CCHS, and all these cases. A lot of NLSCY, a lot of graduates, that's the National Longitudinal Survey of Children and Youth. Many researchers, particularly PhD students, are interested in children and youth and that particular survey, and along with that, many of the questions are health-related. So you can see a number of recent studies there. There's more, number more, again, using these mainly, all these three surveys. These are, I would say, about 60% graduate student, would you say?
Well, I was actually just counting them up before we came over, and sometimes I'd say at least half of them have a graduate student involved, and sometimes the principal researcher may be a faculty member, but there's a master's student who's a co-investigator who does a master's thesis as part of the project. So there's a lot of PhD and master's theses have come out of these projects. I counted about 10 which have resulted from these projects, as well as research papers.
So you can see there's a diverse set of topics, and it's never ending. These data are very, very rich, provide great opportunities, and they're free. And if you were a graduate student, especially in the social sciences, that perhaps quite possibly in Canadian social science departments weren't a partner or an RA in a highly funded CHR or SHIRT project. You know how difficult it can be sometimes to do your dissertation if you have to go out and collect your own data. So this has certainly changed that picture for a lot of graduate students. Okay, in order to get access to data research, then you have to jump through a few hoops. There is a research proposal, and it's submitted online through SHIRT. This is not the same kind of very rigorous kind of SHIRT evaluation that we associate with our own standard grants and other kinds of things. This is going. The attitude here is to want to support this proposal. It's vetted both by through peer review in terms of the substantive and theoretical aspects, and it's vetted by Stats Canada in terms of the data needs involved. Okay. Once it's approved, people are subject to an RCMP security clearance. We've never had anyone fail that I know of, so they're all honest people, and no convicted felons. But I think you can probably be a convicted felon.
You probably could, as long as you're not a spy.
Yeah, as long as you're not a spy, you can be a convicted felon. Okay. Once you are approved, there's an orientation session with Pat, and you take an oath of office to become a deemed employee of Stats Canada. The researcher requires to provide some information, a report of some kind. It could be to Stats Canada. It could be a report. It could be their thesis. It could be their dissertation. It could be a peer-reviewed article. It could be a government report. They're going to produce something out of this, hopefully, better. And as a result of that, Stats Canada wants a copy of something, and it's written into the contract that the researcher signs that they will provide something that Stats Canada can retain in-house, and if they like it, it'll probably be mentioned on the Daily, which is the daily bulletin from Stats Canada, which is often picked up by the media and reported on in the newspapers and things like that. So you might become famous and skip. Okay, so the evaluation process is fairly straightforward. Clearly defined project objectives, demonstrated need for the detailed microfiles rather than the pumps, that the data will support the proposed research. Stats Canada someone familiar with the data at Stats Canada will ascertain that. Peer review will deem whether it has scientific merit. Again, it's not the kind of ruthless critical review that we often associate with the funding councils. This is something like, this sounds like this person knows what they're talking about and has the resources to do it, and it sounds like a nice idea. Okay, you submit online. There's a need for high security and confidentiality. This is a lockdown site over in the PAS building. On the second floor of the PAS building, you need a swipe card to get in and out. Everything is recorded. It's only people with permission are allowed in. Those are the researchers and Pat, of course. Access limited to researchers with approved projects and sworn in under the Stats Act. Physical security, as I've just mentioned. There's the orientation session. Pat is always an employee on site. We have as for now, we have when Pat's over here, we have a graduate student who is an employee of Stats Canada, works part-time. Disclosure analysis. Disclosure analysis refers to the idea that no data can leave the center, no output can leave the center without first being reviewed by Pat, and to make sure that that any information that's contained there could not, by any stretch of the conceivable stretch, violate one's privacy. So it's certainly the case that information of a highly confidential and private nature can be reviewed in the RDC. And of course, it's set up as a very comfortable working environment with large workstations and dual LCD screens and very high power, brand new, as I speak almost, new high-speed micro computers, a lunchroom, a microwave, a fridge, and things like that. So it's a good place to work. Artwork on the walls. It's a good place to work, but people do like to take their findings home. It's not, or they take them to their advisor on that, and they're allowed to do that so long as Pat gives permission. But if it's the case that something is seen to potentially have a very small, usually very small cells in tables will be grounds for saying, well, this can't leave the RDC. So in order to, your supervisor will have to come here. Not many supervisors want to do that. They like students to come to them. Okay, and we'll finish up here with Sandra just to sort of go through the quick steps to plan a project, and that will be it.
Okay. Well, your first stop is still the local data center and the pump file. So me or one of my colleagues, because you got to jump through all those hoops to get into the RDC, and they won't let you in if they think you can use it elsewhere. So there's that in this file. These files obviously have the easiest access. They're right there on your computer, and they probably meet the needs of most patrons. A lot of the undergrads are using those as well with great success. And they're not as burdensome as the synthetic or master file. A lot of times you can just pretty much do a lot of times there's even some Excel and B2020 files that are available through the DLI. And I like those because I can understand those right away. So for some people, for some undergrads, that's all they need as well. If more detail is needed, you can often refer to the master file documentation. Sometimes it'll be there, or we may have to ask Pat about that. But that sometimes will help to indicate whether or not the stuff that you're getting your missing variables, your missing data, well, are they available in the master file? The master file documentation can help determine that. So implications for analysis, just to run through these briefly. For the pump files, It's valuable content for a tremendous amount of research. There's a lot of data files there, and they do have a pretty decent amount of information in most of them. But they do have suppressed observations, suppressed variables, suppressed content. As Keith was mentioning earlier, it's just the gross geography, maybe just a CMA as opposed to the smaller city or town. Collapsed categories, the capped variables, those incomes that he was talking about. Where issues arise is when smaller area geography is desired. A neighborhood, a rare subpopulation has to be studied, or the variables that are needed have been used to anonymize respondents. The pump files, part of the DLI, it is a licensed product, so you have to agree to certain terms of use. The two basic ones being you have to be a member of a DLI institution, and secondly, that the output is going to be used for research or teaching purposes. And there can be no linkage to multiple units of analysis except for a few exceptions, such as the GSS time use and the family. For synthetic files, some of the implications are they do look like master files. And as we mentioned, they have lots of observations and variables with little grouping or capping and lots of geographic detail. But as we mentioned earlier again, the results aren't authentic. They may be close in the aggregate for some synthetic files. And as Pat said, they should be used for testing the analysis setups only. And you would still need the master files for any publishable results. So you can't publish anything from what you might get from the synthetic files. The master files, well, we've got all the observations. Has the most variables with the most detail, lots of geography and personal characteristics, little grouping or capping of categories. But we have that restricted access, only available to authorized Statistics Canada employees, which includes the deemed employees. And the use of the analysis is controlled through that contract that Keith mentioned. And here we can do those linkages. These are the variables across files within a study. For example, and I'm going to call it the kids survey because it's a whole lot easier and that's what a lot of people call it, where there's actually different units. There's a kids section, a parent section, and a teacher section. You can actually link those together using the master file. And so if you need more information, here is our information to contact us. Our names, our addresses here. Go to the libraries, or even just the University of Waterloo homepage. There's a little person directory. If you can't remember the email, and you remember our names, you can try there. I'm also on the library homepage. There's a SWORDC homepage. There is the website URL down at the bottom. And so please do contact us if you have any questions or need more information. I think that's it.
Yeah, so questions now. Oh, there's one over here.
I'll ask you to use the microphone, and when you do, point it towards yourself.
I have a specific interest, not so much in the statistical data, but the background data you need to present the statistical data. So, for example, do you have such things as postal code mappings to census tract mapping and that kind of thing? So, you know, for instance, if someone wanted to present demographic data on a map.
Yes. The geography is on the master files.
Okay.
So it is possible to use mapping software.
No, that wasn't quite my question. My question is, for instance, do you support postal code to census tract mapping? For instance, you know, obviously if I'm in a certain postal code, that must map to some census tract. Now I understand that postal code zones and census tract don't always quite fit together, one of those little slips in life. But do you support that kind of stuff? Can I get easy access to that kind of information?
Postal code conversion files are available through the DLI, and my understanding is that those are what you can use. Our map library is another good resource to go to because they have all the GIS software and that, so they're used to those kinds of questions. So, but
in order to get access to the master files to do it, the proposal would have to be approved. And then if a researcher has the understanding of how to do it and can bring their own software, and it is possible.
Yeah, I guess I'm looking at it from a different point of view. A researcher does some work on demographics, for example, which has been approved, obviously.
Okay, yeah.
And now they come to me. I actually build software. I mean, that's what I do for a living, if you like. And the software we build has a significant mapping component, but it does not use GIS at all. It's a much, much simpler way of doing things. Mm-hmm. And one of the issues you get is you want to refer to something, somebody gives you an address, for example, with a postal code, and you want to now map that to a census tract because you want to look at, say, the average income in that area, if that's legitimate to do. So I need that kind of information, and it's been hard to get up till now. And I'm just wondering, it sounds like you have it. I don't want to use GIS software per se, but I do want the underlying data that allows you to do the various transformations. I think you do, but I wasn't sure, and that's why I'm asking the question.
I mean, we can look into it for you if you want to send me an email now.
Sure.
And detail a little bit. We certainly
Okay.
can look into it. I think we have it. I mean, this is something that, you know, people have asked about. We had that one proposal from Windsor that was along these lines.
Yeah, we don't currently have any projects in the research data center doing mapping, but I know at some of the other centers they do. But the researcher typically has to bring their own software in and know how to do it. And if the data will support it, it's possible.
Yeah. We know how to do it, but we need the background data to actually
Yeah, you
make
need
it
the database that basically.
Well, you need postal code, I gather.
Yeah.
Well,
Postal code.
postal code to census tract mapping is one of the.
Yes,
biggest-
that's available.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think it has to be on.
Yeah, no, that sort of thing is quite possible.
Yeah.
Thank you.
When you were talking about gaining approval through proposals, were you talking about the original proposal for the actual research project going into SHRC, or
okay.
a separate proposal to access the data?
Good question, yeah. Any SHRC-approved project, anything that's been already approved by SHRC
Right.
has automatic access to the research.
Not automatic.
Well, it was more like,
But
okay, not automatic.
It might get fast-tracked. You know, you still have to go through the process,
Yeah.
but I believe it skips the peer reviews if it has been peer reviewed for SHRC once.
if there was a project that was already underway and it was identified that perhaps some of this data would enhance the
Yeah.
findings, is it too late at that point?
No.
Okay.
What you would do is you would submit your proposal. The proposal is quite short. They never tend to be, well, again, they go on electronically, but the hard copies that we see tend to be, 10 pages or less. There's no budget or anything associated with it because it's free. We're just simply making an argument for the substantive, theoretical, policy-related purpose of the project and describing the nature of the data needs, and at the same time, persuading the reviewers that the person has the resources and is competent to undertake these kinds of analysis and things like that. So so it's quite short. It would be a proposal that would be in a sense not really an addendum, but a short proposal, separate proposal that would go in to the RDC proposal through the RDC proposal website. The turnaround on these is supposed to be, what do you think the turnaround on these proposals currently is these days?
I think it's roughly 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
But there is some fast tracking.
Yeah.
Student proposals are put through more quickly.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, if it's already gone through SHRC review once, there are some new rules about that, but the rules are constantly changing, so it's a good idea to check whenever you're going to submit a proposal. Check and make sure that you're taking the correct steps.
Yeah.
And again, to get a sense of what is available, we should go to the, what was it, the LDC?
Well, we have the RDC website has information about the holdings as well.
I can give you an RDC website that will have all the documentation on many of these surveys. But if you've already got a project underway and now you'd like to add this component to it, hopefully within 6 weeks, and we very much strive to get quick turnaround on these proposals, because we don't want graduate students in particular, but any researcher, but particularly master's students, hung up for a year or something like that, which is what could happen with a regular funding council kind of thing.
Other questions? I have a couple of odd ones, perhaps. First, we use the term CMA. What does that mean?
Census metropolitan area. So
okay. So that's a
large, like we are CMA here.
When the suppression is done, I gather it's done by Statistics Canada.
Yes.
Is that correct?
By the author.
Are you familiar with the algorithms that are used to do that? I mean, can you describe those at all, or give us some idea of
Black marker. I don't know.
Yeah, they must choose. It must be
really
cell size.
depends on the survey.
Sorry?
Each survey has its own rules for suppression, and some of the surveys are much stricter than others. The post-census surveys, the participation and activity limitation survey, for example, I don't think there is even a public use version of. Some of the data files don't have a public use version available. So in terms of the suppression, it really does depend on the survey, and I don't think there's just one algorithm that's used.
But I sort of have a picture in my mind that there's someone looking at the frequencies or something for this survey, and they say, okay, well, either we're going to delete this variable, so hit the delete, or we're going to recategorize it or cap it or something and say, okay, well, we're not going to allow them to know about these people in Funky Doodle's corner, so we're going to throw them into Kitchener CMA, and that'll be fine.
Okay, so it will vary by the different situations. With regard to the security of a center like this, I think it's interesting that it's been done in universities. We have break-ins here like mad. I mean, computer science. How does that work out across the experience in Canada in terms of the security of the facilities? Physical security, I guess, is really what it is.
They have, Stats Canada has very strict rules about making sure these things are highly secure and non-trespassable and things like that. When we built the center, we actually built it in the former animal, some of the former animal labs over the psychology was no longer using in the PAS building, and those too were highly secure environments because of protests over use of animals but it wasn't secure enough for Stats Canada. We had to raise the mortar to the deck, as they said, or we had to actually mortar up to the next floor to make sure that no one could crawl up and climb over, things like that, behind the drywall and that kind of thing. We had a Stats on our opening day, a person from Stats Canada came down who was their security analyst, and he reviewed our situation and made us do a number of improvements in order to increase security. We have, basically, we're behind 2 locked doors, steel locked doors, and as I say, one of those requires there's obviously the security system there, and there's pass keys or pass swipe cards in and out.
We have motion detectors.
We have motion detectors.
So once the alarm is set, if somebody breaks a window, there's wire mesh in the window, and then there's a motion detector.
I'm amazed they even let you out now.
We have no...
Well, we were lucky to get the windows.
Yeah.
We're very privileged to have you here today, I understand.
We got windows that face out onto a hall, but the computer screens are not allowed to face the windows.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I had to change my 2 computers. I have 2 computers. I have an internet machine and an internal network machine. And I had a choice between switching the positions of them or getting smoked glass on my window. So I switched my computers because I wanted to be able to see out.
Have there been any break-ins across Canada in these sites? Just
No.
No, there hasn't. So it's a very secure site. Okay.
Well, who would want to?
Yeah, it's like
really?
unless they wanted to steal some fairly good.
Oh, they might.
The equipment,
computer equipment is very valuable.
And we just newspaper just showed a whole bunch of 77,000 patient files found on a tape again, or that kind of stuff. So it's always the issue of just actually destroying the data, which pretty well means in some cases destroying the media themselves. Absolutely, totally. Well, first of all, thank you very much for talking today. And as you go off and you look at the logo and find out what it means,
I will let you know.
I'd also like to know why the rays of the sun slightly overlap the right side of the logo from its side. And as you do this, I'd like to include a chapter in the next version of the Da Vinci Code. So thank you very much.
I'll let you know that. Thanks.